My CEO Fiancée ordered me to launch her new River Line train. I was the independent commissioning engineer whose signature was still missing from the passenger release, and Celeste Arden knew it. When 60 invited riders boarded beneath live cameras, the cab display changed from test to demo. A platform gate stayed open beside a stroller. Celeste said, "Send it, Caleb." I entered the cab, pulled the red emergency brake, and killed the launch on live television. The train settled against its suspension with a hard metallic sigh. Every screen on the platform changed from the mayor's smiling face to mine. My hand remained around the triangular handle. Red enamel, narrow black stripe. A tool meant to be noticed only when everything else had failed. "Step away from the control desk," a woman said behind me. Ruth Bell had been introduced to the cameras 10 minutes earlier as the city rail safety commissioner. She was 51, compact, silver-haired, and the only person on the platform with legal authority to seal the train. She wanted an uneventful certification ceremony. I had just given her the opposite. I released the handle and raised both hands. "Do not reset the cab," I said. "The event log is still live." Ruth looked through the open cab door. "What did you see?" North Platform Gate 4 remained open after passenger doors closed. The cab changed to demonstration mode. In demo mode, the train can show a green departure signal without confirming every platform barrier. Outside, a young father dragged the stroller back from the open gate. Nothing had touched it. Nothing had needed to. The point of an interlock was to make sure a driver never had to gamble on that distance. Celeste entered the cab. She wore an ivory launch coat over a dark plum blouse, not the ceremonial blue dress her communications team had suggested. She had chosen the coat because it made her look like the person responsible for the machine. At that moment, responsibility looked furious. "The dashboard was green," she said. "The dashboard was lying by design. You approved the demonstration sequence. For an empty platform, the microphones outside were close enough to catch us if either of us raised our voice." Celeste noticed. She closed the cab door, leaving the cameras to film through glass. "There are no passengers near Gate 4 now," she said. "There were when you ordered the train forward." Her eyes moved to my bare signature line on the release sheet clipped beside the console. "You told me the sensor was stable. I told you I expected to close the fault by morning. Those are not different sentences when the launch is in the morning." Ruth opened the cab door again. "They are different in my report." She carried a narrow evidence case. From it she removed numbered orange seal tape and placed one strip across the brake handle, another over the reset switch, and a third across the data port beneath the desk. "No one touches this cab," she said. "No one removes a passenger, copies a log, or opens the control room without my staff present. Arden Mobility will submit a complete incident disclosure by 6 this evening." Celeste turned. "Commissioner, we can explain the configuration in 20 minutes. Then your 6 o'clock report will be excellent." Ruth stepped onto the platform and ordered the passengers evacuated through the rear doors. She did not accuse us. She did not need to. The sealed red handle did the work. Julian Pike reached the cab as the first guests came off the train. Julian was Arden Mobility's operations director and the man who had trained Celeste when she joined the company at 26. At 54, he knew every municipal deadline, every union schedule, and the names of most technicians' children. He also controlled launch staffing and the demonstration orders issued that morning. His objective was not obscure. If the River Line missed another certificate window, the city could cancel the operating contract, and 300 employees would lose a year of secured work. He looked at Ruth Seals, then at me. "You stopped a stationary train in front of every broadcaster in the city." "I stopped a departure signal. The platform was controlled. The stroller was beside an open gate." Julian's expression changed for half a second. Not surprise. Calculation. "The north gates were placed in demonstration tolerance at 7:40, he said. "Your team knew." "My team knew the platform would be empty." Celeste faced him. "Who changed the cab state from test to demo?" "Signal staff, under the morning order." "Whose order?" Julian glanced toward the cameras. "This is not the place." That answer told me more than a name would have. Celeste took one step closer. "The place became public when the gate stayed open." Julian lowered his voice. "We have a frozen line, a frightened mayor, and every investor asking whether your fiancé staged this because you refused another delay. Do not create a second crisis before we know what happened. He did not stage an open gate, Celeste said. It was not a defense of me. It was a refusal to let Julian replace a visible failure with an easier story. I stepped out of the cab. The platform had become a corridor of faces turned deliberately away. Technicians knew I had led commissioning for 14 months. They also knew Celeste, and I were supposed to marry in 6 weeks. Nobody could decide whether I had protected passengers, humiliated my fiancée, or used safety rules to win a private argument. The answer might have been all three, if my judgment had failed earlier. Celeste's phone vibrated. She read the screen and held it toward me. It was a message I had sent at 2:13 that morning. Northgate stable through 12 cycles. Close remaining alarm by morning. Do not move to passenger state until final sheet. The restriction was clear, but the first sentence was what people would remember. Julian forwarded only the first line to launch operations, Celeste said. He cut the message. He sent a screenshot. I saw what I expected to see. And what did you expect? Her jaw held still. That you had finally stopped finding reasons to delay my line. The word "my" landed between us, with more force than the break. For 11 months, my firm had tested Arden Mobility's doors, signals, platform barriers, emergency power, and control logic. Each delay cost the company money. Each one also existed because steel and software did not care who was getting married. Celeste had never asked me to sign a false release. She had asked me, more than once, whether perfection was becoming my excuse for never trusting her. This morning she had answered that question for me. Ruth's deputy approached with 2 clear evidence bags. Commissioner Bell requires all access credentials used since midnight. I unclipped my black commissioning token and placed it inside the first bag. Celeste surrendered her executive access card into the second. Julian did not move. The deputy looked at him. Operations credentials too. He smiled without humor and complied. Celeste watched my token disappear under a tamper seal. Until the city clears access, she said, you are suspended from Arden property. The words were formal enough for the watching staff and personal enough for me. You cannot suspend an independent certifier, I said. I can remove a contractor from my site. Then remove Julian too. I am removing everyone whose access may have changed that train. Julian began to object. Celeste cut him off. That includes you. For the first time that morning, he looked genuinely surprised. Ruth gave us until 6. Celeste gave us until the platform cleared. I walked out through the maintenance gate, while the red brake handle remained sealed behind glass. I had stopped the train because my signature was missing. By the time I reached the street, I understood that my missing signature might be the smallest part of what I had authorized. Ruth Bell moved the incident review into a windowless training room beneath the station. It belonged to the city, not Arden Mobility, which meant Celeste could not order anyone out and Julian could not call the equipment his. At 10:15, 5 sealed evidence bags lay on the table beside a monitor connected to a read-only copy of the train log. Theo was 31, a signal technician I had trained through the final year of commissioning. He knew the river line's logic better than most managers knew their own calendar. He wanted 2 things that morning: to keep his crew from being blamed for an order they had followed, and to tell the truth without losing the career he had spent 9 years building. The source of his access was already visible inside the bag between us. My black commissioning token. Ruth stood beside the monitor. At 2:41 this morning, credential CR01 enabled demonstration tolerance for North Gates 3 through 6. She looked at me. Your credential? Yes. Celeste sat very still at the end of the table. Julian leaned back. Then we have our answer. We have a credential, Ruth said. Mr. Rowan, where were you at 2:41? In the lead cab, testing the departure circuit. Your token was used in the North Signal cabinet. Theo had it. Theo closed his eyes once. Celeste turned to me. You gave away a commissioning credential. The cabinet reader had stopped recognizing technician cards after midnight. We were losing 12 minutes every time Theo came back to the cab for me. That is not an answer. It is the reason. The answer is yes. Ruth asked Theo to describe the sequence. Gate 4's closed sensor flickered after the cleaning crew moved a floor plate. We realigned the sensor. It passed 12 cycles. Mr. Rowan told me to keep the alarm visible until we completed 30 loaded cycles. Demonstration tolerance let us test the train's other departure logic without clearing that alarm. Who requested the tolerance remain active for the morning program? Ruth asked. Operations Control. A name. Theo looked at Julian. Mr. Pike. Julian did not deny it. Because the press rehearsal required the dashboard sequence, the platform was supposed to be empty. That is what you told me, Theo said. And did you remove the tolerance before you left? No. The morning operations order said the next shift would remove it after the rehearsal. Ruth changed the screen. A simple timeline appeared. No code, no colored diagrams, just actions and times. 2:41. Demonstration tolerance enabled. 4:06. 12 stable gate cycles completed. 6:30. Overnight signal shift signed out. 7:40. Press rehearsal began. 8:28. Passenger boarding enabled. 9:02. Emergency brake applied. The danger sat between 7:40 and 8:28, when an empty demonstration became a passenger launch without a safety state change. Ruth pointed to 8:28, who enabled boarding. Julian answered before Celeste could. Guest operations, under an executive exemption. Which executive? The authorization is in the passenger file. Then we will open that file with its custodian present. Celeste's gaze remained on the timeline. I knew her expressions well enough to see the answer before the file arrived. You enabled it, I said. I approved invited occupancy, she replied. That is not the same as changing the train mode. It is exactly the difference between a rehearsal and a launch. Julian raised one hand. We are confusing separate decisions. The train was mechanically capable. The gate alarm was a display condition. Passenger boarding was authorized based on stable cycles. Theo looked up. Gate 4 was physically open. After the stroller brushed the boundary. The stroller never touched it, I said. We do not know that. Ruth enlarged the platform camera record. It showed the father stopping half a meter from the open panel. No impact. No child's hand. The barrier had failed to close on its own. Julian folded his arms. Do we agree the brake prevented departure? Ruth asked. The departure controller would have held, he said. In demonstration mode, it was already green, I replied. Ruth let the silence stand only long enough to make Julian answer. He did not. Celeste asked Theo. When you left at 6:30, did you believe passengers would board? No. Did Caleb? Not from anything he said to me. That helped less than Theo intended. I had given him my token. I had sent Celeste a message whose first line sounded complete. I had trusted the phrase empty platform as if a spoken limitation could survive a live launch without appearing on the control order. Commissioner, I said, my disclosure should record an uncontrolled credential transfer. Celeste faced me. Before we know whether the credential caused the passenger state, it caused the override access. Theo caused the access under your direction. Julian extended the setting. I authorized passengers. If you file one piece first, every headline will turn a chain of decisions into your confession. It is my confession. It is also incomplete. Ruth slid a blank statement form toward me. You may submit a personal disclosure now. The company report remains due at 6. Celeste put her hand on the edge of the paper, not covering it, but close enough that I could feel the request. Give me 2 hours, she said. Let me open the passenger file and the morning orders with counsel. Then we submit one chronology. A chronology or a defense. Those are not always enemies. Today they are. Her hand withdrew. I wrote plainly. I had permitted Theo Marsh to use credential CR01 during overnight testing. I had failed to record the transfer in the access ledger. I had sent an informal stability message before completing the loaded cycle requirement. I had not signed the passenger release. When I finished, Ruth read it twice. Submitting this may affect your commissioning license, she said. It should. Celeste stood and walked to the far wall. Julian watched her rather than me. Caleb, if you surrender your authority before the line is assessed, the city has no qualified commissioning lead on site. That is a problem you should have considered before using my credential as cover. I used a tested configuration. You used the appearance of my approval. He tapped the table. 300 employees are not an appearance. Neither is an open gate. Ruth sealed my signed statement in a clear sleeve. Mr. Rowan's certification authority on the river line is voluntarily suspended pending review. He may answer technical questions under city supervision. He may not alter, approve, or release equipment. In 30 seconds, I had no authority over the line. Celeste returned to her chair. I want the passenger file open now. Ruth called its city custodian. While we waited, communications manager Dana Creel entered with a draft statement. Celeste had appointed her to prevent improvised public promises. Dana could publish only what Celeste and the city approved. Dana placed the draft before Celeste. The first sentence called the stop, an abundance of caution, intervention during a controlled demonstration. Celeste crossed it out. There were passengers aboard, she said. It was not controlled. Julian leaned over the table. You cannot tell the public the train was uncontrolled before engineering establishes that. Then we say the passenger launch occurred, while a demonstration setting remained active. That ends the contract before the hearing. Celeste looked at him. Did you crop Caleb's message before forwarding it? I forwarded the relevant test result. The restriction was relevant. The restriction was already in the operations order. Show me. Julian opened the order on the read-only screen. It authorized an empty platform press demonstration from 7:30 to 8:15. Below it, a second entry extended the demonstration setting until 9:15. The extension had Julian's approval. Beside it sat a linked occupancy exemption, marked executive authorization required. The custodian arrived carrying the sealed passenger file. Celeste stopped asking me for 2 hours. She already knew whose signature we were about to find. The passenger exemption carried Celeste's signature at 8:11 Friday morning. Its conditions were plain. Attendance at every affected gate and no movement before commissioning control confirmed final state. I authorized boarding, she said. I did not authorize departure without Caleb's release. Ruth pointed to the launch audio marker. At 9:02 you said, send it Caleb. I believe the final state was green. Because the screen was green, I said. Because Julian told me every gate had an attendant, and the display tolerance did not affect movement. Theo shook his head. It affects the departure logic, that is its purpose. Julian answered him. It allows the departure sequence to display during demonstrations. Manual control replaces the automated condition. Where was the manual control at Gate 4? Ruth asked. No one answered. The staffing sheet did. At 8:20, Julian had reassigned 2 gate attendants to the VIP doors after the mayor's security detail requested a separate boarding lane. Gate 4 remained listed as covered because the staffing system counted a floating supervisor whose radio had been moved to the south end. Celeste read the sheet twice. You told me the attendants were in place. Julian's voice stayed measured. They were when the exemption was prepared. You moved them and did not revoke boarding. Security changed the platform plan. We had stable gate cycles. The train was not moving until 9. And at 9, you stood behind me while I ordered it forward. You are the chief executive. Julian had used her authority, not invented it. At noon, Ruth took Celeste and me back to the sealed platform with 2 city engineers and a camera that recorded every movement. Thea remained in the review room. Julian was not permitted on site. The train still stood where I had stopped it, the red brake handle crossed by orange evidence tape. Safety devices should be ordinary enough that using one never requires courage. Ruth stopped beside Gate 4. The floor plate sat a few millimeters high at one corner. Overnight cleaning equipment had caught the edge, shifting the sensor bracket beneath it. Theo had realigned the bracket, but loaded vibration from a full platform had disturbed it again. Could you have predicted this exact movement? Celeste asked me. Not the exact movement. Could the 30 loaded cycles have exposed it? That is why the cycles existed. She looked toward the train. Julian said your remaining tests were procedural caution. You could have asked me. I knew your answer. That is not the same as asking. She had booked an Arden wedding venue before asking. I had refused it, then avoided choosing another. She decided because I delayed, and I delayed because she decided. Neither pattern belonged inside a train cab. Ruth photographed the plate. Keep that discussion in the record only if it explains authorization. It explains mine, Celeste said. I believed Caleb would cancel the launch if I told him about passengers before the loaded cycles were complete, she continued. I allowed Julian to present the exemption after boarding began. I intended to show Caleb a successful platform and force the decision into the present. Ruth asked, "Did you believe that was informed approval?" "No." "Did you believe passengers were protected by attendants?" "Yes." "Would you have ordered departure if you knew Gate 4 was unattended?" "No." None made her order safe. I walked to the edge line and looked down the platform. Celeste stayed behind the painted boundary without being told. On the opening broadcast, she had stepped across that line 3 times while talking to cameras. The change was visible and late. "You put people aboard to make it harder for me to say no," I said. "Yes." "You used passengers as pressure." I told myself I was preventing another indefinite delay. "That is a sentence Julian would use." "And you gave Theo your credential because the rules were slowing you down," she said. "Yes." "That is a sentence Julian would live by." Ruth looked between us. "Good. You have both discovered that bad systems rarely belong to one villain. Now decide whether your 6 o'clock report will say so." At 2, the city provided a disclosure template. It had separate sections for mechanical condition, configuration, staffing, authorization, credential control, passenger decision, emergency response, and corrective action. Julian sent Celeste a proposed corporate chronology through council. It described the event as a near departure prevented by redundant intervention. It acknowledged the open gate, blamed a technician-level configuration error, and stated that executive occupancy approval depended on inaccurate operational assurances. Theo's name did not appear, but his job did. Mine appeared 7 times. Celeste read the last page and passed it to me. "If I submit this, the city may preserve the contract until Monday. If you submit it, Theo becomes the unnamed technician who caused everything, and you become the conflicted contractor who intervened after his own access failure. Both are partly true. That is why the document works." At 3:30, Dana reported that broadcasts framed me as either rescuer or saboteur. The board wanted a statement. The union wanted protection from premature discipline. Celeste issued the assurance. Julian called her immediately. She put the call on speaker in the city room. "You cannot surrender disciplinary authority during an active incident," he said. "I can prevent you from choosing a convenient technician before we disclose management orders. You are exposing the company to collective claims." The company exposed its crew to an order chain it could not safely follow. Celeste, 300 jobs. Do not use them as passengers too. She ended the call and removed Julian's operations access pending the hearing. She could do that as CEO. She could not fire him before the independent review without making his defense look like retaliation. At 4:10, Ruth informed us that a partial corporate report would not satisfy the city. If the full chronology was not filed by 6, the operating certificate application would be denied rather than suspended. The company could reapply, but the municipal contract allowed termination after a denial. Celeste opened a blank document. Under Ruth's supervision, we wrote the chronology ourselves. I dictated the credential failure. Celeste included my entire message. She dictated the occupancy exemption. I included stable cycles, and she included missing attendance. We named Julian's orders and our own choices first. At 5:47, Theo read the technician section. "It says I used Caleb's credential." "You did," I said. "It also says he directed the practice." "I did." Theo looked at Celeste. "It says operations told me the platform would remain empty." "That is what happened," she said. He signed his witness confirmation. At 5:52, Celeste and I signed the full report. Ruth transmitted it to the city record. The application changed to suspended before 6. Outside the training room, the station had gone quiet. The cameras had moved to Arden headquarters. Dana waited at the far end of the corridor, giving us privacy without pretending we were alone. Celeste twisted the engagement ring on her finger. "I do not want this to become a weapon," she said. "Then do not throw it." She almost smiled. It did not last. "I ordered a train forward because I believed knowing your answer was the same as receiving it. You broke an access rule because you believed knowing Theo was the same as controlling his use. We are 6 weeks from promising to trust each other for the rest of our lives. I know. No, we know what the other person will probably do. That is the problem." She removed the ring and placed it in my palm. "This is not a public breakup," she said. "It is not punishment. I need us to stop using an engagement as evidence that consent has already happened." I closed my fingers around the ring. The brake handle was sealed. The train was frozen. Our contract was suspended. For the first time that day, the most frightening thing in my hand was small enough to hide. I left it visible. Saturday morning began, with the city trying to reproduce our failure. Ruth allowed Theo into the North Signal cabinet under direct supervision. I stood behind a red floor line with no credential, no tools, and no authority to touch the system I had designed the test plan for. Celeste watched from the opposite side of the platform. Julian attended through a city video link because his ardent access remained suspended. Theo reset Gate 4's sensor bracket, closed the floor plate, and ran 12 empty cycles. All 12 passed. A city engineer then rolled weighted carts across the tiles to reproduce a crowded platform. On the 7th pass, the plate shifted. The sensor changed from closed to uncertain. In normal mode, the departure signal turned red. Theo enabled demonstration tolerance with a city test credential. The same uncertain sensor remained visible as a small amber alarm. The departure sequence turned green. No secret program appeared. Nobody had sabotaged the train. The machine did exactly what our orders allowed it to do. Ruth stopped the test, record the condition. One of her engineers photographed the display and the plate. Theo disabled the tolerance and stepped away. Julian's voice came through the platform speaker. "This confirms that the underlying controller behaved as specified. It confirms the train would accept a departure sequence with an uncertain gate during demonstration mode," I said, "with manual attendance required." Celeste looked toward the camera. "You removed 2 attendants. Security demanded a separate lane. You accepted the demand without canceling occupancy. You signed occupancy." "Yes." Julian paused. He had expected her to argue. Celeste continued. "I signed because you told me the manual controls were staffed and the display tolerance could not release movement. Both assurances were wrong. My decision was still mine." Ruth closed the video connection. Before the exchange became a hearing rehearsal. At 10, the union representative produced 3 statements confirming Theo used my credential openly after the cabinet rejected technician cards. 2 quoted me, "Use mine until the reader is fixed." A temporary violation had become invisible because everyone saw it. "No technician should be disciplined for the credential transfer," I told Ruth. "The direction was mine." Theo objected. "I knew the rule." "So did I. I had authority over the test. You had a failed card reader and a schedule. I could have stopped work. You could have. I taught you that stopping work was allowed, then made it clear I would be disappointed if you used the permission." The union representative wrote that sentence down. Celeste asked Theo whether Julian had pressured him to leave demonstration tolerance active. "He asked whether it was required for the press sequence," Theo said. "I said yes if they wanted the dashboard animation before loaded tests finished. He told me morning shift would remove it after rehearsal." "Did he mention passengers?" "No." "Did I?" "No." Celeste nodded. "Then your statement should not carry a decision management kept from you." Before noon, the board demanded Julian's restoration or a replacement. Celeste instead divided interim authority among the existing signal, station, and labor leads under Ruth's evidence limits. When the board asked her to step aside as CEO, she refused. "I will recuse from launch authorization and the investigation," she told them on a recorded call. "I will remain responsible for payroll, contract response, and funding corrective work. Accountability is not disappearing when the difficult part begins." It was the first decision since Friday that I trusted without needing to check. At 1:30, Ruth gave us the city's preliminary conditions. The river line could retain its contract only if the Monday hearing approved a corrective order. Arden Mobility would fund a 30-day recommissioning process controlled by a city-selected independent panel. Celeste could not authorize occupancy or launch during that period. My firm could advise on the system history, but could not perform the final certification. My personal commissioning authority would remain suspended for at least 90 days, subject to a separate license review. The technicians who gave candid statements would receive corrective training rather than discipline, unless later evidence showed intentional concealment. Julian would be allowed to challenge his removal at the hearing. If the hearing rejects the order, Celeste asked. The certificate application is denied, Ruth said. The city may terminate the operating contract. And if the order is accepted, you keep a path to service, not the schedule you promised. Celeste read the conditions. Who chooses the independent panel? The city from its existing regional roster. Neither Arden nor Rowan Commissioning may nominate members. Good, I said. Ruth studied me. Your company loses its largest contract under this order. That does not make the condition wrong. It may make your employees disagree. They did. My business partner called. Rowan Commissioning had 14 employees, and the River Line represented 40% of our year. Without final certification work, we had perhaps 4 months before needing another contract or fewer desks. Can the city let us finish under supervision? He asked. Not if the public is supposed to trust the result. The failure wasn't in our test design. My credential was in the cabinet. Because the client's reader failed. Because I chose speed over the access rule. He went quiet. Are you resigning? No, I'm accepting that we cannot certify this line. That distinction will be comforting when payroll arrives. Celeste had heard enough from the other end of the corridor to understand. Arden can pay the full value of the canceled certification phase, she said. Under which clause? Termination for client-caused conflict. That would make my loss look purchased. It would make your employees paid for capacity we reserved. Have counsel send the clause to Ruth and my partner. Do not send it to me privately. She accepted the boundary without calling it cold. At 3, Julian requested a private conversation with me through his attorney. Ruth permitted 10 recorded minutes in the training room. On the wall monitor, Julian asked me to call the stop precautionary so the city could correct the lapse without destroying the launch team. The signal was green with an open gate, I said. The driver was waiting for my release. Celeste ordered departure, and you were prepared to continue. Julian leaned toward the camera. I am trying to preserve 300 jobs. You are trying to preserve a rule after admitting you broke one. That is why I have to tell the truth about both. Your license review does not need your 2:13 message. The message did not configure the train. It configured Celeste's expectation. You cannot regulate expectations. No, but I can disclose what I supplied. He looked tired then, not sinister. Julian had spent 4 years building a schedule that politics, weather, materials shortages, and our tests kept moving. Each delay had taught him that another exception was survivable. Friday was the first time he had been wrong in front of passengers. At the hearing, he said, I will argue the train was safe to hold at the platform, and your public intervention turned a correctable staffing lapse into a citywide panic. Then I will explain why the handle exists. The call ended. Celeste and I prepared separate hearing statements that evening. We worked at opposite ends of the city room, speaking only when a time or order needed checking. At 9, she sent me her draft. It took responsibility for occupancy, the departure order, and failing to tell me. It also stated that she had relied on professional assurances from Julian and on my stability message. All true. My draft took responsibility for credential access and ambiguous communication. It stated that executive and operations decisions converted a limited test setting into passenger risk. Also true, 2 accounts could be honest and still sound like 2 people arranging blame between them. On Monday, Julian would ask the city to choose the version that saved the contract. Celeste and I had to decide whether we were willing to lose it before anyone believed we had told the truth. The Monday hearing took place on the same platform where I had pulled the brake. Ruth chose the station so every claim could be tested against the train, Gate 4, and the painted edge. The sealed red handle remained visible through the windshield. No diagram was needed. At 10, Ruth opened the record. Julian spoke first. His attorney sat beside him, but the argument was his. The train was mechanically capable, he said. Manual attendance replaced one automated condition. The staffing lapse was correctable, and Caleb intervened before traction power engaged. This was not a runaway train. Ruth established that Julian had not objected to departure, had authorized the staffing change, and had relied on a floating supervisor at the south end. "But you expected the train to move," she said. Ruth rephrased. After Ms. Arden said, "Send it," did you intend for the departure sequence to continue? Julian waited. "Yes." Theo testified next. He described the shifted plate, the stable cycles, my credential, and the instruction to leave demonstration tolerance for morning shift. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not volunteer to become the person management had failed to supervise. Theo admitted knowing the credential rule and using mine because I told the crew to continue after their reader failed. Neither Julian nor Celeste placed it in his hand. "The access came from Caleb," he said. "The passenger decision did not. When Ruth called me, I stood beside the painted floor line rather than at a podium. She asked whether pulling the emergency brake had been mechanically necessary. It was procedurally necessary," I said. "The train had a green departure signal under a state that was legal only for an empty demonstration. Passengers were aboard. Gate 4 was open. The person expected to provide final release, me, had not signed. The fastest, unmistakable way to stop the sequence and preserve its log was the brake. Julian's attorney established that traction power had not engaged. The train had not moved, and the driver could still refuse. The brake was one of several options," I agreed. "It was the only one that created a state nobody could reinterpret while the CEO ordered departure and operations believed conditions were satisfied." Ruth asked what would have happened if the train moved half a meter. The open platform gate would have remained beside a live track edge while passengers expected the barrier to protect them. The stroller was already within one adult step of that opening. The danger was not a train racing away. It was the system telling every person on that platform that the boundary was closed when it was not. The father's written account entered the record without putting his child before cameras. Then she asked about my credential. Precise language could save me. The reader failure created urgency, Theo was trained, and my credential did not authorize passengers. All true, all incomplete. I normalized an access violation, I said. I told technicians to use my credential because the correct process slowed testing. That practice allowed a configuration change to carry my authority after I had left the cabinet. I also sent Celeste a stability message before completing the loaded cycles. The restriction was in the message, but the reassurance came first. I knew the launch pressure she was under. I wrote as if facts could not be selectively heard. My business partner sat behind the City Rail Council. He lowered his eyes. I accepted the 90-day suspension and my firm's exclusion from certification. We do not wait for our shortcut to become the last shortcut in the chain. I sat with no certainty I still had a company. Celeste stood next. The cameras shifted toward her. She ignored them. Ruth asked why she signed the occupancy exemption. "Because I believed manual attendants were present, and the remaining demonstration tolerance affected presentation rather than departure authority," Celeste said. "I also believed Caleb would refuse the launch if I told him passengers were boarding before his final tests. I wanted the full platform to make another delay harder." "Were you misled?" "Yes." Julian turned toward her. Celeste continued. "I was misled about staffing and the effect of demonstration mode. I was not misled into putting passengers aboard. I signed that decision and withheld it from the person responsible for release." Her counsel touched a folder. Celeste closed it. Celeste admitted knowing I had not signed and believing the green display and waiting passengers would force my release. Was the line ready? Ruth asked. No. The word traveled farther than any defense. Julian requested permission to respond. Ms. Arden's testimony ignores the financial context, he said. Another delay threatened 300 positions and a municipal investment the city itself pressured us to protect. Management decisions are made under cost. Mr. Rowan's standard became impossible because every closed test produced another test. I expected Celeste to defend my caution. She did not. Caleb did sometimes add checks late, she said. His communication made delays harder to plan. My response was to bypass his informed decision instead of fixing the contract and review process. Julian's response was to make the bypass operational. The jobs matter. That is why they cannot depend on us pretending those decisions were safe. One of the city commissioners asked whether Arden Mobility could survive the 30-day process. Yes, Celeste said. We will pay employees through the delay. Executive incentives for the quarter will be suspended. The company will fund the independent panel and all corrective work. I will accept a written prohibition on launch, occupancy, and commissioning decisions until the city restores that authority. And if your board removes you, then the conditions still bind Arden Mobility. Do you ask the city to preserve the contract? I ask the city to preserve the conditional path if the public conditions are met. I do not ask you to call Friday acceptable. The hearing recessed at 1. Celeste and I stood at opposite ends of the empty train. Through the windows, we could see each other but not speak without walking the distance. I walked it. You did not have to mention the passengers as pressure, I said. Yes, I did. Your counsel disagreed. My counsel is trying to keep me CEO. Are you? I do not know. She looked at my closed right hand. I still carried the engagement ring in a small cloth pouch inside my coat. I had not put it away at home because hiding it felt too much like deciding. Do not give it back because we testified well, she said. I wasn't going to. Good. That sounded disappointed. It was two separate feelings. I am learning not to turn one into authorization for the other. The dry precision was hers. I missed it enough to feel the cost of waiting. At 3:20, the city returned. The corrective order passed. The Riverline contract remained suspended but not terminated. Independent recommissioning would begin Tuesday. Arden Mobility had 30 days to correct the physical gate system, access controls, staffing chain, and launch governance. My firm could provide records and answer questions but would receive no certification authority. My personal license review would occur after 90 days. Julian's operations approval was revoked from the project. Arden's board terminated him that afternoon for extending the demonstration order and changing required staffing without renewed safety review. The city record also preserved that Celeste's authorization and my credential practice had made his decisions possible. Theo and the overnight crew entered corrective training under the candor protection Celeste had issued. Ruth removed the evidence seal from the data port so the independent panel could begin work. The seal across the red brake handle stayed. That one remains until passenger release, she said. Celeste and I left the station through different doors. We had saved a path for the train. We had not used the hearing to save ourselves from consequence. That was the first honest foundation our marriage might have had. It was not yet a reason to build on it. Independent recommissioning began the next morning without either of us in charge. The city panel entered Arden Mobility through a temporary access system installed overnight. Every engineer used an individual credential. Every configuration change required a named request, a second approval, and an automatic expiration time. The North Cabinet reader was replaced before anyone tested the gate. Theo used his own card. From the review room, I answered questions but never touched the keyboard. Soon restraint felt like the point. Gate 4 received a reinforced plate, protected sensor bracket, and second position check. The work expanded across the line. Demonstration mode could no longer coexist with passenger occupancy, and manual operation produced a blue non-traction test state. We found no hidden flaw, only safeguards deadlines had separated. While the panel controlled the line, the board reviewed Celeste and permanently removed launch authority from the CEO role. She remained CEO after disclosing her decision, protecting technicians and funding correction. She lost her incentive, opening bonus and project control. Workers were paid through suspended executive distributions and the launch contingency reserve. My firm lost final certification work. The termination clause Celeste had mentioned was real. Ruth reviewed it, the city published the payment, and my business partner accepted compensation for the capacity Arden had reserved. It kept 14 employees paid through winter. It did not replace the contract. I spent the first month pursuing smaller regional work, credential audits and commissioning communication reviews built from our reported failure. 3 companies declined, 2 agreed, and a technical college hired us to revise its testing course. We became smaller before stable. My personal license remained suspended. I taught, reviewed records, and let other engineers sign their own work. Celeste and I lived separately. She stayed in her apartment near Arden headquarters. I rented a narrow place above our office so I could walk downstairs when worry made sleep useless. We did not turn separation into silence. Every Sunday at 5, we met in a licensed relationship counselor's office chosen from a list neither Arden nor my firm had used. The counselor did not decide whether we should marry. She made us name when prediction became permission. Celeste's venue, occupancy, and departure decisions, my shared credential, reassuring message, and refusal to make wedding choices. You make me become decisive, then punish me for deciding, she said during the 4th session. You make my hesitation prove I am difficult, then call the result efficient. The counselor asked what changed after saying those things. Nothing. That was the lesson. Naming a pattern did not repair it, behavior did. Celeste began asking questions she believed she already knew the answer to. Would I review a public statement as a private reader, with no expectation that my response became engineering approval? Would I attend an Arden dinner as her partner, knowing I could leave without explanation? Would I prefer the wedding conversation next week or next month? I began giving answers that could actually be used. No, not while my license review was open. Yes, if our relationship was disclosed on the guest list and not in the program. Next month, Sunday at 5 before counseling. We stopped treating discomfort as process failure. 32 days after the brake pull, the independent panel completed loaded testing. Gate 4 passed 200 cycles under simulated crowd vibration. Access controls rejected shared credentials. The train stopped automatically when the blue test state detected an occupancy request. Ruth approved technical completion, but withheld passenger release until staffing drills and governance procedures passed. Celeste did not ask her to accelerate it. 2 weeks later, the city restored the operating certificate with permanent conditions. My firm's name did not appear on the certificate. Celeste's signature did not appear on the release. Theo's did appear in the maintenance acknowledgement for the repaired gate, beside the city engineer who verified his work. He sent me a photograph of the signature page. Not for approval, his message said. I replied, good distinction. My license review concluded at 90 days. The board imposed a 6-month restriction on lead certification and required supervised credential compliance work. I accepted it. My business partner accepted my resignation as sole access administrator before I could offer it. We appointed one of our senior engineers and gave the role an independent reporting line. You are learning, he said. I dislike your tone. That is not a compliance concern. It was the kind of humor our office had lost during the river line. Hearing it return mattered more than a formal statement about morale. At the end of the 4th month, Celeste and I walked along the public river path beside the elevated track. Empty test trains passed overhead under the new certificate. I carried the engagement ring in the same cloth pouch. I do not want Friday's hearing to become the noble disaster that proves we belong together, I said. Good, it was expensive and poorly catered. I am serious. So am I. The coffee was punitive. I took out the ring. Celeste's smile disappeared, not from disappointment but attention. I am not returning evidence, I said. I am asking a new question. Will you marry me after we choose the date, place, and terms together? Terms, not legal terms, the human ones. Caleb, those are usually harder. Understood. She looked at the ring but did not reach for it. Do you want an answer now? That question was the difference. Yes. Then yes. She held out her hand, and I placed the ring on it. We married 3 weeks before the new launch in a small city conservatory neither company had worked on. Theo and Dana attended. Ruth declined while she remained the line's regulator, then sent a card after certification. Julian did not attend. Arden's board had upheld his termination. He later accepted an operations planning role outside passenger systems under conditions disclosed in the city record. We did not need him ruined to understand why he could no longer control a launch. 5 months after the first ceremony failed, the Riverline platform opened again. There was no mayor in the lead cab and no investor seating block. Families, commuters, technicians, and station workers boarded in ordinary order. The father with the stroller had declined every interview. He accepted 2 transit passes from the city, not Arden, and entered through Gate 4 after watching it close. Celeste stood beside the cab door in a dark mulberry coat. She was there as CEO, but the new procedure did not allow her to release the train. I stood beside her as an invited passenger. My badge said Caleb Rowan. It did not say commissioning control. Through the windshield, the red triangular brake handle remained crossed by a fresh city seal. Ruth had removed the evidence tape after testing and replaced it with the ordinary tamper strip used on every passenger cab. Celeste touched her radio button. Station control, does the River Line have passenger release? She did not say send it. She asked. The independent controller answered, passenger release confirmed. Platform gates closed. Route authority green. Celeste turned to me. Would you like to ride with me? Before, she would have assumed my answer, and I might have delayed until she stopped asking. Yes, I said. We took 2 seats behind the cab. Theo stood on the platform with the maintenance crew, hands clear of the controls. Ruth watched the gate indicators from station control. No single person owned the permission. The doors closed. Gate 4 closed and locked. The departure signal turned green only after the final check arrived. The train moved beside the river with no speech, no forced applause, and no hand reaching for the red brake. Celeste placed her palm upward on the seat between us. I chose to take it. The first launch had stopped because she issued an order, and I used the only answer no one could ignore. This one began because every necessary person had been asked, and every answer was clear.